Hello and welcome to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. I'm Dino Verrelli, founder and CEO of Project Purple. We have an exciting interview coming up with a special guest after a few quick updates. Since 2010, we've contributed over $4 million and counting to pancreatic cancer research efforts. We've also allocated over $1,500,000 worth of aid to more than 1,500 patients and families through our patient aid programs. Your monthly or one-time gift can improve patients' lives through research and assistance programs. You can donate now at projectpurple.org. Pancreatic cancer does not rest, and neither will we. Your support is truly appreciated. If you're looking to get involved in one of our events, whether that means joining a run team in 2026, participating in a virtual run walk, group fitness, golf, or anything else you can think of, visit projectpurple.org/events to learn more. Without further ado, let's meet today's guest on our podcast, coming to us all the way from lovely Loveland, Colorado. Pancreatic cancer, we like to call survivors superhumans, and so I will mention the term superhuman here because they are superhuman. But Anne Dirkse, Anne, thank you for joining us here on the Project Purple podcast.
Great to be here and great to meet you, Dina.
So I know I'm going to put you on the spot here really quick. I do this often, so be prepared. I'm only joking. I won't. But you did say you are an avid. I would say avid. I'm putting words in. You have listened to the Project Purple podcast,
Yeah.
because you have tried to find people, and we're going to hear about your story, that have gone down a very similar road. And I just think it's so cool. Before we hit record, I gave you kind of just the show notes and stuff, and I just said, you know what, you're going to be someone's inspiration. So it's just so cool for me, when when we were, before we hit record, we were talking about things, and it's just awesome to know that people do tune in to these podcasts, and listen. It's the reason why. And I've always said, even if it's one person, if there's one person out there that we are inspiring or that we are connecting, or that knows that they are not alone in this fight, that they have someone else that's going through something very similar that they can lean on potentially, it's worth every single podcast that we've done over almost 7 years. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for allowing us here to get into your story. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Anne. And this is your opportunity to kind of share your backstory with what brings you here today to the Project Purple podcast.
Perfect. So first of all, thanks for doing this, like I said. And as far as who I am, I live in Colorado. I've always been really into the outdoors and a pretty active person. My background from a professional standpoint is in software development. So that's kind of maybe at odds with the outdoor personality sometimes. But I think that's given me a lot of gifts, which I'll talk about as we go forward. Just in being able to look at big problems and to break them down into smaller things and have approachable goals. I'm also a chicken keeper. I have bees. I grow a lot of my own food. I'm really into being a healthy person. That's a huge part of my identity. I'm a daily exerciser, and throughout my adult life, I've always kind of been training for something. Mostly that's bike rides. I love my bike. I'm really into active transportation too. So I'm pretty much always going somewhere, doing something. Traveled all over the world. Been really lucky to be able to do that, both for work and for pleasure, including a lot of treks. And I've taken a couple of long distance bike trips. The first one along the length of Patagonia, and the second through Central America, basically Mexico to Honduras and back. So, and I did both of those solo. It's kind of just what I like to do. I like to get out there and kind of challenge myself. And so one of the biggest challenges I've faced recently, of course, is being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And I've taken kind of the same approach that I take to a lot of challenges that I've experienced with this so far, which is just to look at individual parts of a big problem and to try to start to process it. So I've really found that I've been able to use a lot of my background as a cyclist and an endurance athlete to approach the problem of pancreatic cancer, and especially to focus on keeping my body healthy. I think, as a marathoner, when you're trying to do a big effort like that, you have to consistently challenge your body in order to get the gains. But the hugest part of that, and when those gains actually happen, is during recovery, right? So when you're eating, when you're resting, when you're hydrating, when you're taking care of your body, is when you actually make that progress. And so for me, pancreatic cancer has kind of become um, the problem, and I need to focus on the recovery aspect of it. And so, in terms of my diagnosis, that started in March of this year. And a couple months before that, I had just been feeling a little bit more tired than normal, maybe. I am normally super active, right? I'm walking or riding my bike or doing something every day. And I just was taking maybe a few more naps than normal. But I was also volunteering. I was do snow shoveling for the city for people who are like, physically disabled or unable to hire somebody to do their snow shoveling. There's a volunteer group. And I'd been doing a lot of snow shoveling. So I was just kind of like, well, um, it's probably just that I'm doing a lot of extra hard work, and that's why I'm tired. So I was taking a few extra naps. And as an athlete, I'm really focused on nutrition. I'm always kind of focused on how much I need to eat to cover my activity. And it was getting really hard to eat enough. I would be really hungry feeling. I would look at a big plate of food and think, this is great. And I would eat maybe a cup and a half, three-quarters of a cup. And it was like I just had Thanksgiving dinner. And that was really, really alarming to me because I knew I was putting out the effort. I knew my body needed the calories, and I just wasn't able to eat more than maybe that much food at a time. Right? It was just half cup, three-quarters of a cup. And so I went to my doctor after a while. But first, I tried to troubleshoot it myself. Right? So I thought, what could be causing this problem, and what can I do in my diet to make it better? So I cut out coffee, alcohol, spicy foods, which I love, acidic foods. I tried to kind of do everything that was nice for the stomach, and it just continued to get worse. So made an appointment with my doctor who was out of town. And so I saw a substitute doctor that I hadn't met before, and talked to her about what I'd done to try to solve the problem already. And also about I have a pretty significant family history of cancer on both sides. So my dad had colon cancer in his 50s, and his mother also had, we think it was stomach cancer, but we don't really know because it was pretty far advanced when she was diagnosed. But that was also in her 40s or 50s. My mother's mother had colon cancer in her 40s. So between my parents and my grandparents on both sides, I have three grandparents and two parents that were all diagnosed with cancer at a fairly young age. So we talked about that, and she said, I'm going to put you on an antacid. I think that's going to solve the problem, and we're going to get a CT scan just for fun. We're just going to be sure that there's nothing going on because you are at higher risk for cancer with that background. But I've always kind of understood that I probably would get cancer in my lifetime, right? You don't have a family history like that and not encounter it yourself very often. So I've been on top of all my screenings, right? I get not only mammograms, but breast MRIs because my mother had breast cancer twice. I get all my colonoscopies. I try to get them as frequently as possible, right? I'm always on top of all of that. And I figured that when I was diagnosed with cancer, I would catch it early, and I would take care of it, and it would be a part of my life, but it wouldn't define my life. And so I went and got the CT. It was all fine. They actually were able to get me in the next week. So it was a very fast process. And throughout the whole thing, I thought I probably have an ulcer, right? I had a bike crash a couple of years ago and a hip replacement that resulted from that. And I take a decent amount of ibuprofen on a normal basis. And I thought, I'm drinking a lot of coffee in the winter. Like, I've probably given myself an ulcer, and that explains all the symptoms I've been having in my ideal view of how it was. And so I wasn't really worried about the CT results. I almost didn't even go because I thought I felt a little bit better. And I was like, no, this is just go. So a couple of days after the CT, I was just woken up in the morning. It was about 5 a.m. And rolled over, and I hear a ding on my phone, and it's a message from my portal saying that I've got a new test result available, and it says something, they give the background as to why you were tested and all of that, and I'm dreading an ulcer, right? Because I wouldn't want to deal with it, right? And it said large mass on the left lung, extensive lymphadenopathy, and a lot of other stuff, are all indicative of widespread metastatic disease. And I said some words that I won't repeat here, and I read it again, and I read it probably 4 or 5 more times, and it was devastating, right? It was like there was no even indication of where I had started. Um, so I woke up my sister, who's my best friend. We live together, and we do pretty much everything together. And I just I just said, "You have to read this," and I showed it to her, and we cried, and then we went for a walk. It was still super early, and I didn't want to call my parents, and I wanted to think about what I wanted to say, and so we just went for a walk, and we talked about it, and we came up with a plan. And fortunately, I'd been having some problems with the antacid they gave me. I started having splitting headaches after that, and I'd made an appointment to follow up with my doctor. Fortunately, for that same morning, so um, that was a big relief because I already had an appointment scheduled. And when we got home from the walk, I called my parents and I let them know what was going on. And we all cried, and then we said we've got to figure out what's going on and how to get through this. And that's kind of a foundational part of the experience for me, is just feeling my family come together. Both of my parents, like I said, are cancer survivors, and 25 and 30 some years, respectively. So they have the experience, and I really relied on them, and my sister as well. She's had type 1 diabetes for more than 30 years now. So she's kind of been a mentor to me through this whole experience. And we we just kind of came together and said, we're going to go to the doctor and we're going to see what he says, and we'll sync up later. So my doctor was amazing. He ordered pretty much every cancer marker, because we had no idea where it had actually started. And kind of ironically, we joked because the CT said there's no evidence of anything on the pancreas, and he's like, "Well, that's a good one. Like that's a good one not to worry about. We're going to order the CA 19-9, and that's for pancreatic cancer, and we don't expect that there's going to be anything there because the CT doesn't show anything on the pancreas. It was mostly the lungs, the left adrenal gland, and then I had involvement all through the peritoneum and lymph nodes. And so basically, he got me into, I have a local MD Anderson Center. It's 2 miles from my house. It's walkable, which is great. He got me in there the next day, told me to drive out to where I'd had the CT done and get the actual images for them. And so the next day I had my first oncology appointment. Day after that, I had a PET, and then an endoscopic ultrasound a bit later, where they finally narrowed down. So they looked at the genetics actually of the tumor on my lung to figure out where it had started. And it was through the endoscopic ultrasound that they finally found the primary tumor on my pancreas. But all the genetics and other details pointed to that already.
But nothing on the CT originally showed anything on the pancreas, though.
Correct. I have never actually had a CT that shows a mass on the pancreas. When they found it on the EUS, it was about 2 centimeters.
Yeah.
So the thinking is that it was below the threshold to be visible on the CT. It was not significantly more hypermetabolic on the PET either.
Yeah.
But
And if you had an MRI, did they ever do an MRI with contrast?
they didn't do an MRI. No, the CT was with contrast. And basically it was at the time that they did the EUS. They said they probably wouldn't have even looked there
Yeah.
based on my symptoms. But so it's about the size of a quarter. And for some reason, in my case, it spread very aggressively, very quickly. And we're not sure why. Um, but I also, in terms of screening, it's hard to see how I could have found it before it spread, right? Because
It
um,
wouldn't have showed up on any diagnostics, which is like super frustrating because I know we've talked about this at length with some clinicians, like the machines are only as good as what they can pick up.
yeah,
And sometimes you often hear this, like, someone goes in for, some sort of procedure, like a Whipple, happens to be probably the most common where they see no evidence of metastatic disease, and then surgeon opens them up, or they go in via a robot, if they're doing it laparoscopically, and they find mets on the liver, and then that's a most surgeons will just stop right there. But those mets don't show up on any of the diagnostics, right? So this is a little bit of the reverse where the mets showed up, but the
yeah,
primary, but again, the point here being, where I think technology is really good. I'm not trying to throw it under the bus here, but it's also as good as like we've gotten to a certain, like, I don't think we've progressed much on like any new type of diagnostic to like see like even, we talk about it at inception, right? To your point, like, if you were in screening, would it have been caught? If you're in a high risk screening program prior to, like, probably not. Like, if it wasn't caught when it was metastatic, would it have been caught like earlier and on a high risk screen? Probably not.
yeah. I think the only thing that would have been an indication beforehand would have been the 1909. So that was
Yeah,
5180. So that's
that's high.
yeah, it's pretty high, right?
Yeah,
And so I think that would have been high for some time beforehand. But it's not appropriate for screening, right?
correct.
It's
Yeah,
not
they don't use
it's
them.
for screening, and so it would have had to been really lucky to have found it early. Um,
So I would imagine as you go through this, so I just want to pause here for a second because I know like the whole looking on my chart here I think in the systems use like this my chart or epic that comes up.
yeah,
I don't know if that's good or bad, and I'm not posing this question as a exercise, again, hindsight being 2020, but the roller coaster of emotions, right? Like you see the chart and then you go in before you even talk to a clinician, you kind of already know like what the deal is.
yeah.
um And then you go through this roller coaster of like, all this diagnostics and not necessarily knowing. So was there a strategy that you used to kind of like just like get you through that time frame? Because I
Yeah,
gotta imagine that was like that had to be like a roller coaster. Like you said, like you woke up and then you're like, hey, let's go for a walk with your sister, like, because you gotta like do something. You're not just gonna sit there and just like think about it, or come up with a plan. It sounded like you guys went on the walk to come up with that plan. But like, were there other strategies, or what strategies to help you get through that time frame? Because there's so many unknowns, right? And you don't know what you don't know, I guess, at that point in time until you actually do further testing. But you know enough that
yeah.
something's up.
I mean, my strategy is always just to break things into small pieces and to not, you can't conquer something that's so huge all at once. So you have to start to see it in small chunks. And I think for myself, I tried to be interested in it. Actually, that was one thing I did that took some of the fear away from it. I like a challenge. I like a hard thing. I don't like.
Clearly, if you bike across countries, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I did for my vacation, right? And it's like every day you cry a little bit because there's some sort of pain. And
Yeah.
I've learned to kind of embrace that and to say, okay, well, um, the unknown is just the unknown. And it's the biggest part of fear. When you look at a diagnosis like cancer of unknown primary, which is what it was at first, it's like there's so much unknown. And that is the part that makes you feel like you have no control and like you have no agency in what's happening. And for myself, I tried to establish agency really early on. The one thing that was clear is that I needed to maintain my weight. Um, so like I told you, I'd only been able to eat small amounts of food, but I did it really, really frequently. And as soon as I realized there was cancer there, that was the first thing I did in the morning was have a small meal, and I would wait and I would say, "Can I eat again?" And I just kept eating throughout the day, and that seemed like one point of control that I had. Right, walking, I continue to do every day, and it's kind of terrifying when you realize that you've got some big masses in your lungs. Because I kept thinking, um, am I going to start coughing up blood? Am I going to start experiencing worse symptoms? And I did, as the whole process dragged on, trying to figure out what we were actually going to be treating. I started having more shortness of breath, and I also have asthma. And so it felt very familiar in that it was kind of a crisis coming. And so I worked to do everything I could to keep my lungs strong. My doctor was fine with me continuing to do aerobic activity and, in fact, encouraged it. So that was a big stress relief for me. I think anything that engages both sides of the brain, walking and cycling being, and obviously running, it is very useful, I think, to processing traumatic events. And this was one case of that where, being able to go for a walk and talk through what I was afraid of and what I was already mourning really helped me to process it in the moment and to kind of deal with the unknown. I think from the first time when I called my parents, I said, here's our latest adventure, right? I mean, I've scared them a lot of times. I did like the trek to K2 base camp in Pakistan. Sometimes I get on a plane and they're like, well, I hope we see you again. And so they're kind of used to me being a little bit scary. And we had to all kind of conquer that together. But it just brought me back almost immediately to my first bike trip in Patagonia, where I had all these great intentions and I planned and all of that. And the second I got on the plane and it started backing up and I realized my bike is under there, I have basically no hotel reservations or anything. Like I had the first night planned, but that was it. It's an open-ended trip. And I had a return trip, but that was, I had no specific plan and I didn't know it was coming. And I just felt this insane amount of panic. And it took me back to that, but it also made me realize that that was one of the best experiences of my life in so many ways. And like I said, I cried every day. There was always some big challenge, but it was just an outstanding experience. In spite of the difficulty, the positives that came out of it were huge. And I think that was true of my diagnosis as well, where you start to be really appreciative of the things that you have when you start to face the reality that your life might be a lot shorter than you anticipated. And having such a great family around me was amazing. Friends are everywhere and they were so supportive and still are. And then I also had a really great team working with me on the cancer center. And there are just, I feel like so many things to be grateful for that I really focused on that more than the unknown, because the unknown we can't predict. It's even true with scans, right? Like, is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Like, am I going to have a 5% chance of living 5 years or a 3% chance? It doesn't really matter because we don't know yet. And I can't waste that much mental energy on the worry part. I've spent my whole life trying to live in a way that's meaningful, and that like, while we live, let us live is one of my favorite phrases. And it's really important when you feel like your life is really at risk. That's when it's most important. So it's kind of what I did. And I walked a lot, and I rode my bike. And I cried when I rode my bike too. Um, I talked to my bike. It's kind of one of those things that happens when you spend like endless hours there. And her name is Cindy. And I just said,
Oh,
Cindy, we've been through a lot together, and we're going to get through this together, no matter where it ends. We're going to get through it together. And I'm not going to, I'm not dead yet. In the words of Eric Idle, also a pancreatic cancer survivor, Monty Python. Um, so yeah, um,
love it. What has treatments been like for you? So you go through this in March. When do they get you on treatments? And then I have a follow-up question on that as well.
so I didn't start treatment until mid-April. Um, we took some time to look at what clinical trials might be available. Unfortunately, being in the middle of country, it's kind of there's not a lot
Challenge.
available here, and
Yeah.
it's do you do you uproot your entire life and go to one coast to the other and try to make something happen there, including even just getting approved to be a part of a clinical trial, which is um, it's a time consuming process. It's intimidating when you're first diagnosed with something, and pretty much as soon as we realized that it had come from the pancreas, we looked at that, and I really didn't feel like I had a lot of time um, to waste at that point. Every day it was getting significantly harder to breathe, and I just thought, I just want to, let's just try chemo. Let's see. I'd read a lot online. They tell you not to do that, but I had um, about what to expect, and I honestly didn't even know if I wanted to try chemo just based on what I'd read, but I did. It's kind of hard when you're there with your parents to say like, I don't know if I want to try that, right? So what's the worst that can happen, right? Like either way, I could die. That's
Yeah.
the reality. So I tried it. I was on Nalirafox at first, so I did 12 rounds of that. Um, Nalirafox, for those who don't know, is very similar to FOLFIRINOX. It's just got a liposomal version of the irinotecan, and I've been very fortunate to tolerate that very well. It's a lot easier for me than I thought it would be. I was really lucky to find some resources about dealing with neuropathy in advance. So specifically cold therapy I did throughout, and I have some nerve damage, but not peripheral neuropathy. So I've gotten through the oxaliplatin at least, and now I'm on Naleri, which is basically the same thing minus the oxaliplatin. And we may go back to Nalirafox at some point. I'm not sure, but I've been really active throughout the whole thing, and I think that really helps. It definitely helps with the symptoms from chemo, and I think there's also some indications that it helps to actually fight the cancer itself, right? That by making the tumor more vascular,
Mhm.
that it can break down the stroma and it can make the chemotherapy more effective. So reading and hearing about some of these studies it was like the best part of being diagnosed for me, honestly, was being encouraged to exercise, which is the one thing that I was most afraid of having to give up. Um, so yeah, I've continued to ride my bike, and I can do about 20 miles now. I don't push it further than that. Um, and
On one ride or in a
yeah,
week?
just in one
Wow.
ride. Yeah,
Wow.
we have
That's
a little
awesome.
loop around the city.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it's not. It seems like a lot if you're a runner, right? Because it's like almost a marathon, but
Yeah, but 20
divide
miles
by
is 20.
four. You know,
It's no, I mean, we have a Peloton, but it's not the same, I know, but 20 miles is like, yeah, that's 20 miles. It's
yeah,
20 miles, whether it's a bike or riding or run. I mean, I know, yeah, running's a little bit more, but that's still a lot. Like if you can do that in one shot. There
I
is
mean,
some
it's
fast.
slow.
Yeah, but like who cares? You're not going to win a race. Like you're
Yeah,
not
no,
in it to win to win money. So as long as you get it done. There's some fascinating data and like recently and I'll also share anecdotally some of my observations, but there has been a lot of data recently about exercise and chemo and the benefits of exercise during chemo. And I think when people hear that, it's not like, hey, we're saying go join CrossFit or go to F45 and like smash workouts. Exercise is relevant to
Yeah,
everybody, but to your point, like that, that process of opening up, those the blood vessels and everything is really beneficial. In a lot of this data recently, there's been some fascinating data over the last like 8 months about that benefit. And I think the other piece to this is, I have just seen through the 7 years of the podcast, and I have the numbers. I think I have interviewed over 125 survivors at the time of recording.
wow,
And there's a couple of tenants, and one of them where I see people actually, do very well, whether they're in active treatment or, no longer in treatment, is exercise. Like that is one of the main tenets of success from the data that we've seen from the superhumans that we've interviewed. And when I say exercise, I think it's all relative to what that person was doing. Let me
absolutely.
preface that. So, like, for instance, one person was heavily into yoga. So, during their treatments, they continued yoga. Was it as intense as prior to? No, but they were able to still do that exercise during that time, which they credit for helping them along with a bunch of other things. But it was one of those tenets, right? So similar to like what you're saying here, like, hey, you used to ride a bike, you used to probably put in like a lot of miles every week. Now you're getting to 20, you're still able to walk, you're still able to do these things. That's still exercising, right?
Yeah,
So that's really the key here. And I've seen it again, I've seen tons of data here in the last 8 months about the benefits of exercise that we're starting to see more of these data sets come out about the benefits of certain things during chemotherapy that assist that process and are beneficial for patients. But also, just my kind of observation from talking to so many superhumans here on the podcast is that exercise is there's a handful of tenants and exercise is one of them. And again, but it's relative to what that person was. It's not saying like, hey, if you were living a sedentary lifestyle, like you got to go join F45. We're not advocating for that. Um, it probably would if you haven't lived an active lifestyle and you are going through some type of cancer treatment. Just as a whole, I think like it's worth a conversation. Maybe not with your oncologist. There are some specialty people out there that are like performance science and doing medical oncology. There's a lady that I know out of Kansas City, and this is what she specializes in, is working. She's a trainer and she has created her practice around working with oncology patients, all cancers, and supporting them while they're in active treatment and post treatment, to continue to be and live active lifestyles. But there are extreme benefits, I think, and I guess extreme is kind of a hard, like that's a harsh word to use, but there are benefits in exercising while in active treatment.
yeah, benefits and benefits throughout the spectrum, right? Because it's not just, I mean, it helps your physical health, it helps with circulation, but also mental health is
Mental, yeah,
huge. And it also helps a lot with chemo side effects, right? So fatigue is one of the huge side effects. And I find that being active helps me rest better, if that makes sense. If I take a long walk, for me, and like you said, it's all relative. I'm tired afterward. I can take a good restful nap after I have my protein shake and my snack, right? Um, like I eat first and then I rest. And that cycle is, I think, very beneficial to um, the body also healing in it, like I keep telling myself I'm a healthy person. I just have stage 4 cancer, right? And it seems a little bit strange to say, but I am. I mean, my blood work is pretty much in the normal range when you look at organ function and stuff like that. I was lucky that it didn't get to a point where I had liver involvement. So, in some senses, I'm very very lucky, and I try to focus on what I have and keeping my body strong. Um, a lot of people have the fighting metaphors that they
yeah,
like, and I'm not a big fan of them. I'm going to let the experts fight the cancer. That's my oncologist and the people that she consults with, and
Yeah.
that's her job. And I'm going to leave that to her expertise. With, I mean, I'm an active part of it, but my job is to keep my body healthy, and having that motivation to keep weight on, to keep active is just it's something positive that I can contribute every day. But in terms of approaching exercise, I think you make a really good point in saying that it is really individual. And one of the things that I used as a model for this was my hip replacement. So that was 2 years ago, and I'd been training for a century ride, so 100 miles in one go. And we were going to do it for Bike to Work Day, my sister and I, with the idea of having it be semi-supported, right? Because Bike to Work Day, there's food stations all along. So we figured we'll go out in the morning, we'll get all the food, we'll eat along the way. Um, Food is a big part of my life, if you haven't figured that out. And then in the afternoon on the return, we can hit all the food stations coming home, and we'll get 100 miles. And it's going to be a lot of fun. And so a few weeks before that, I crashed my bike, really stupid accident, broke my left hip and my left elbow. And yeah, had to
I
have a
like,
hip replacement. Um,
oh,
yeah. So no more century, right? I was not going to be riding my bike, at least not 100 miles anytime soon. And so I just readjusted my goal. I was like, I've been having so much fun training for a century. Now I'm going to train to learn to walk again, right? And there's a lot of nerve damage and muscle damage that happens in the whole surgical process. And
yeah.
my left foot would be. It was like I couldn't even control it properly. I felt like I was a toddler again, where it would just kind of shake and not move where I was intending it to go. And they it's physiologically completely different from the original joint, and it takes the brain some time to adapt to that. So it was a very slow training process. It started out with walking to the end of the block and back 3 times a day, and then I gradually could do a mile at a time, and then 2 miles at a time. So I mean, I think even um, what I was experiencing at that level, though, from an exertion standpoint, was pretty similar to some of the activities that I'd been experiencing before. And I definitely needed to fuel that exercise. I needed to do recovery in terms of getting adequate protein and carbohydrates, and adequate rest and ice and all of that. But it was very, very slow and very, very small steps. At the end of it, I ended up doing a backpacking trip that was 25 miles self-supported, for 3 months. Um, so it really paid off over time. And I'm definitely an extreme kind of person when it comes to exercise goals. But even starting out with just the goal of getting out and seeing the sunlight and walking around a little bit was very beneficial. So I figured, even if I can't do the things that I want to do, I can do small portions of that, and I can still enjoy it, which is the biggest part for me.
It's pretty powerful. Um, I've got a couple questions left. They're all loaded. So definition of loaded means there's no right or wrong. They're just thought provoking. I guess that's my definition. I don't know if that's like, yeah, it's my definition of where the questions and why I use the term loaded. So this happens not every time, but it's kind of wild for me as the listener and the host here and taking notes. So there's like an arch that I draw, and I call it the arch analogy. And like you've had like just listening to you like from your career, like your backstory, software development, and I think you mentioned like, big projects. This is a big project and you can compartmentalize certain aspects of it. And I asked you when, you got that the text that you could read your diagnoses before talking to anyone, like how you dealt with that. And you said that broke it down into, you know, little pieces. So go back to the career, right?
Mhm.
Then you mentioned your family history, right? Like your mom, your dad, both cancer. grandparents, both cancer. So cancer is not really foreign.
Yeah.
You mentioned, your sisters dealt with type 1 diabetes for a long, long time. So, that's another aspect of this arch of telling the story and hearing the story. And then you mentioned all the physical things that you've done, right? And I smile because I always think that I fell in love with running when my dad was diagnosed because it became my thing. My time to have that clarity and to be able to like, whoa, like come off of that. Like at the time was like a 1 mile run, but you could figure everything out, right? And now I go for these long runs and I can just zone out. And I've tried so many things. Biking, you could do that.
Yeah.
Not really in a Peloton because, well, biking, you gotta pay attention, I feel. Well, if you're on a trail, like, you can zone out, but you still gotta pay attention. I think running, there's, like, less paying attention, like, you can really zone out, I guess, if you're on a trail, not in the streets.
Yeah.
Uh, or at these, big marathons when you're following the masses, so you're just going, it's like one foot in front of the other. But, going back to your story, like, the endurance aspect of it, and that was something that I've always like really like that's what like drives me is like how much can you push your body
Yeah.
to that certain level. But then I think the interesting piece that you threw into your story was like this aspect of recovery, which no one really like talks about exercise a lot, but understanding recovery is like critical, right? Like that's like 99% of like endurance sports. Like if you understand recovery, nutrition, sleep, like all the stuff that leads for you to bounce back or to continue to maintain a certain level, you got it figured out. And you kind of have that dialed in, right? And understanding and that realization of that. And then you go through this hip replacement,
Mhm.
you know? So the question is, have you ever thought, and the purpose of this question is not, again, it's not beating anyone up or trying to look back at like, oh crap, like I ate this, or maybe this, I didn't see this. But I do think, and I am a man of faith, I do think we do things in life that we maybe just don't know the reason for why those things happen or
Mhm.
the path that we go down. But when you get diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, like you've got the plan, you've got a little bit of the playbook already down. Like you said, like, like getting that text in the morning and realizing, like, this is how I've got to deal with this thing is insanely powerful. Like how you dealt with that.
Mhm.
So have you had, since this is all, maybe again, it's a loaded question. There's no right or wrong, but like think about like all these experiences that you've done, like the writing. Like I didn't ask, but like, I mean, I know you mentioned it, like you love that aspect of like that long endurance, riding a bike and doing these long treks, like being on your own and like understanding your body, but then understanding what it takes to be on these long treks. They're not easy,
Yeah.
you know going to like various parts of the world and doing this, not easy by what means, but neither is like taking on pancreatic cancer, but you've kind of done a lot of really hard stuff.
Yeah. It's kind of lucky, right? I mean, to sometimes challenges are a blessing in disguise. And I
Yeah,
feel like the hip replacement to me, it was almost all a positive experience apart from the actual, I mean, you never wish for something like that to happen. But
yeah,
I left PT and I just got teary. I was like, I've had so much fun doing PT. It's been such a great experience. And it's not what I wanted to have happen and it's not what I chose to have happen. But I'm not conventionally religious. But I've always had a deep faith in something in the universe. I'm not qualified to discuss what it is. I don't spend a lot of time analyzing doctrine or anything like that. I just believe that there is something out there that brings us in contact with the right people at the right time and the right situations at the right time if we're open to it and we listen to it. Um, and that's about as detailed as I get when it comes to I think faith. It's just to say that I have a deep faith internally, but I don't. it's not conventional, right? It's not
Yeah, and I don't no one's in a position to judge that or put that on anyone. I just think it's so interesting from my perspective as the listener here and the host and taking notes. I often see these, I call them arches, like people
Mhm.
start on this point, they have all these things, and then they end up here in this situation with pancreatic cancer. But all these things that they did in life kind of lead them to having a positive result,
Yeah.
in this aspect. And again, I know we talked about this before we record, like focusing on that positive, and the things that we can do to help not only ourselves but other people is really important for me. So that's why I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah,
Um,
sorry to interrupt. My
no.
sister, she's like I said, she's had type 1 diabetes for more than 30 years. And we talk about this a lot where, the challenges sometimes, I mean, she's the reason I'm so dialed in on nutrition, right? Because when
Mhm.
she rides 100 miles on a bike, it's a total
That's much
thing,
different.
right?
Yeah.
We have to have like the carbs lined up, you have to have extra, you have to have like everything planned. And that's another disease where, you know, this is going to be a part of my life for the rest of my life. One day I woke up and my life is entirely changed from where it was, and it's never going back to where it had been before. And one thing my sister said, which really resonated with me, is that you're never out of the woods. You're never going to be out of the woods again. So you have to learn to live in the forest, and you have to learn to find that comfort and that peace. And I would say also a sustainable pace, right? Um, I need to deal with the cancer treatments, and I need to make that a sustainable part of my life, because that is the future as far as we know at this point. I'm responding really well to treatment. There's a lot of hope in the future, but um, I'm I'm living in the forest, and we're collecting firewood, and we're doing all the things to keep us safe there, um, because sometimes just a change of perspective can really alter how you approach a problem, right? Even looking at statistics with pancreatic cancer, we talked a little bit about that earlier.
Yeah.
Like 3.2% chance of living 5 years with metastatic cancer, according to the statistics. And, a lot of people would look at that and say, well, I might as well just give up and die now because that's a really poor chance. And to me, I think, well, I mean, if your internet were out 3.2% of the time, you'd be really angry, right?
Yeah.
Like 3.2 can be a really large number when you think about it.
Correct.
And when you've got tens of thousands of people being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer every year, those numbers add up. And we are here, we are surviving. And I feel like the shift in perspective toward finding what is safe and what is positive is a really good thing. And one of the things I started saying is, well, if it's a 3.2% chance, then like, what does that 3.2% look like? Who are these people? And I think you've identified a lot of the attributes that are pretty common. Um, and looking to your strengths, I think, is another important thing. Like to me, I've got this pattern that I've followed all of my life in terms of training and fueling and resting. And it's a very familiar pattern to me. It was very easy to fall back into. It's kind of a default. And I think for anybody, just looking at those strengths and saying, what do I have that I can bring to this problem that's in my wheelhouse, right? Is a pretty good approach.
I love it. Um, I know audience that listens often. I know you said you had the strong family history. I mean, I'm sure they did a genetics panel. Did
Mhm.
anything come back genetics at any point?
No known mutations.
Ugh,
I have my dad's side of the family has tons of GI cancer,
yeah.
um, like an outstandingly huge amount, right? I mean, my oncologist looked at the family history and looked at my genetic profile and my family's and said, we don't really understand how you don't have anything here. But
Correct.
yeah, my mom's side of the family, there's a lot of breast, ovarian, melanoma, right? The
Which
things that,
is like a distant cousin, to genetically, if you
yeah,
have one of the genes, which is just so frustrating, I think. I mean, we see this like with a lot of families, unfortunately, where there is a lot of high incidences of GI cancer and cancers that are in that realm, right? There's that six, I think seven or eight actually genes that make up that genetic makeup of high risk for pancreas cancer, but they're also related to the colons, the melanomas, the breast cancers, ovarian cancer, prostate for men. So it's just really, really frustrating when we get families that have these high cancer rates with those cancers, but then there's no gene of significance, which I tend to think from a statistical standpoint, there is something, we just haven't figured it out yet.
Absolutely. Very similar to diabetes that way as well,
Yeah.
where type 1 tends to run in families, but there's no identified gene that causes it. And there's an indication that maybe there's a genetic portion and an environmental portion as well. Um,
Yeah.
but there's definitely something there that's inherited. I think it's just not identified at this point. And um, I mean, the current guidance is to come back every couple of years and there's new genes.
Get rechecked, but yeah, it's just yeah, and I'm hopeful and optimistic as we build out some of these genetic high risk screening programs that we continue to discover new genes potentially that can help families along the journey. Next question, and again, loaded question. Um, and then I've got one more for you, and then we're going to share where our audience can connect. But what advice, given what you've gone through, what you've experienced, how you've dealt with it, would you give Anne if someone was watching this or listening to this and just got a very similar diagnosis, literally this week or as this episode airs?
I mean, I would say not to give up hope. When I first looked at the options for chemotherapy, I was under the impression that they weren't terribly effective. That has not been the case for me at all. I've had a really good response to chemo. Um, I'm not even eligible for trials at this point, is my understanding, because everything has shrunk back to the point that it's either completely gone or small enough that I'm not eligible for trials. Right. So that is a really good place to be. And I never thought 8 months ago that I would be here now. So there's a lot of reason to be hopeful. And I think when you look at statistics like that 3.2%, which is so discouraging, you have to realize that that's the past. It's based on an arbitrary number of 5 years. And what we're dealing with in the next 5 years is infinitely more hopeful, in my opinion. There are great things that are happening in clinical trials. There are so many promising treatments in the future. And so I think it is absolutely worth it to do first line treatment if that's available to you, even if clinical trials are not available. I think being optimistic and having a strong community is very important. So one of the best things that I've done, both through listening to your podcast and in-person events, is connect with other people who have survived this disease. And it's a very, very important thing to look at. How do people do this, right? What does that 3% look like? And how do we expand that? Because one of the statistics that was also interesting to me is that 50% of people don't actually get treatment for pancreatic cancer. Some of that is because people are diagnosed way too late and treatment's not effective or is not going to be effective. But part of that is just nihilism, right? Part of that is people saying, well, I've got this deadly disease, and so that's the end. And it is that way for a lot of people, right? Unfortunately, that is the nature of the late diagnosis at this point. But I'm really glad that I had a team that encouraged me to just to be positive about it. And I don't know what the future looks like now, but it's a lot brighter. And the other thing I'd say is just look at your strengths, look at what's important to you, and keep doing the things that are important to you as much as you can while you can. For me, that's a lot of being outside and experiencing the world around me. But whatever brings you joy, like this is the time for it. You know, I mean, life is short, and that's true for all of us. But I guess learn to appreciate, if you can, um, the silver linings because they are there. Um, and they're especially there in other people, and just the world around us, right? I mean, we still are here. And every day that I'm alive, I want to experience it to the best of my ability. And it helps.
So powerful. Um, Last question here, and if you've listened, you probably know this one's coming. Um, Again, loaded question, but no right or wrong. Given your experience, what's your definition of pancreatic cancer? How do you define it?
Yes, you're right. I didn't know this was coming, but I think it's something that I've been able to think about a little bit, thanks to knowing that. And I think on one hand, it's a deadly disease that is diagnosed too late, that has inadequate screening, and is far more deadly than it needs to be at this point, and that needs to change. I think on the other hand, it's just another challenge. Um, it's a challenge to me personally, in dealing with the disease itself and the treatment for the disease. It's a challenge to researchers who are doing so much to make this a more survivable disease and hopefully a curable disease at some point. It's a challenge to our doctors because it seems that we all survive differently, right? I don't know anybody else who has had the same kind of progression that I have, when I talk to other survivors, but there are people with similar stories, and um, yeah, we all survive a little differently, and so it's an individual challenge, and luckily we have a lot of people who are engaging with that challenge and making the world better for people with pancreatic cancer. Um, I
It's
think
awesome.
it.
You nailed it right on the head. I mean, there's no right or wrong to it. And I think what you just said is just so powerful. Both pieces, the advice and then how you define it. And it's been a pleasure to be able to share your journey here on the podcast. And I just want to thank you from our community. I know when we opened it, you said you looked at our podcast for inspiration, but you truly are an inspiration for our community. So I just want to make sure you know that. And I just want to thank you from all of us here at Project Purple to allowing us to do that. Someone watching or listening, as we said, maybe they just got diagnosed. Maybe they want to connect and they want to talk to you personally, just like you said, you're searching for people to talk to. Where's the best place for someone to do that?
So best is email. So I'm Anne, ANNE, at Anne Dirkse, my full name. That's ANNEDIRKSE.com. And I have a website that I used as a travel blog earlier, and it's kind of been defunct for, because social media kind of ruined that all.
Yeah.
But I'll launch that again at some point here. So that's AnneDirkse.com as well, and have a little bit of information about my journey and some of the things that I'm doing related to the pancreatic cancer as well. Different adventure, but not quite as pleasant. But yeah, we'll have some things there, and then yeah, I've got an Instagram, but I don't really post to it. So
That's all right. Well, people will find you on the .com. And thank you so much for being a guest on the Project Purple podcast.
thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for watching or listening to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. If you like today's episode, feel free to share this episode and make sure to follow the Project Purple podcast wherever you may listen to podcasts, and make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel because we always put full episodes up on our YouTube channel now moving forward. That's a wrap of another episode of the Project Purple podcast. Thanks for listening, and then be safe. Till next time.